This is an IBM System P5 550Q enterprise server from 2005. Here is a telephone for size comparison, if that helps. I've been trying to get this machine fully operational and running for quite some time, but I keep hitting hurdles. The first hurdle was the power supplies on the back want 220 volts for this machine to turn on and run properly. Here in the United States, our typical outlets are only 110 volts. So I solved that problem and installed a 220 volt service next to my rack that I could run this thing off of, and then encountered my next issue. When I tried to boot it up, I was getting system processor assembly errors. If we open this up, just got a couple thumb screws on the back here. Inside the machine, we've got a couple pretty beefy power supplies. And these guys, these are the processor boards. This one I've marked with an X is the one that's giving me trouble. Let me pull one of these out. They're quite impressive. These processor assemblies each have quad-core POWER5 Plus IBM processors on them. That's where the Q in the 550Q name comes from, stands for quad. And this particular one doesn't work. It doesn't matter what combination of RAM I use, what slot it's in, no good. But that's nothing a trip to eBay couldn't solve. So I've got a replacement unit here. We're gonna swap the RAM in and see if we can get this thing fully operational. In this video, we're gonna dive into all the fascinating aspects of these system pSeries machines, including something called an HMC. It stands for Hardware Management Console. It's a physical machine that I have that is capable of managing many of these units. And then we'll learn about LPARs. The whole point of getting this one processing is there's these logical partitions you can create on these pSeries of machines. They're sort of like lower level VMs. And my main goal here is to get several installed on this machine, and we'll go over exactly what they are and how they work and put these processors to work. Let's get into it. These pSeries machines are absolutely fascinating. I have not looked at this replacement I bought from eBay. Let's get it out of the bag. These babies weigh 7 pounds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but they're not very big, so it's a lot of dense weight all in one area, and it's mostly where the heatsink is. Here's my replacement processor assembly. It is supposed to be working. This is kind of cool. They gave me these little dummy DDR2 RAM stick holders. So the reason these are in here are for airflow reasons. You can see there's no fans attached to this stuff like a conventional motherboard might have. Something like this on the CPU, you'd have a fan. Some of the other stuff is going to have fans. The way these enterprise machines work is you have fans either in the back or front or both of the chassis, and it's blowing air past. And I think the theory is, anyway, I don't think it probably really matters. You have these wind baffles that allow the air to move past efficiently, even when there's no RAM sticks. But I think I have enough RAM to max these out, as I recall, so we'll remove these. These, of course, have IBM part numbers in true enterprise fashion. So I think the first thing we'll do is we'll get this old RAM out and swapped over to the new module. These are IBM branded 4 GB, I think DDR2 sticks. Yeah, PC2 4200, DDR2. All right, you have to bear with me while I do a little housekeeping here. This is the good module. I've pulled it as well. Here's my bad module. When you're doing stuff like this, mark them. I did this months ago, and I'm so glad I did, because I would be confusing these all the time. Here's my replacement from eBay, and I had pulled a bunch of the RAM out. This originally had 64, so all 8 4 gig sticks were populated on the modules. And so I'm going to pop all that back in to get my full 64 gigs back. I had pulled and mixed and matched across the bad one and the good one just to try to troubleshoot and see if it was a RAM issue. I don't think it was. It was pretty clear about this being bad regardless of the RAM configuration, which is really sad actually. So I'm going to get the RAM in, and then actually before the end of the video, we're going to pull this off. These POWER5 Plus CPUs are supposed to be pretty interesting looking, and I think this is probably the only excuse I'm ever going to have and not feel bad about ripping a heatsink off of one and having a look, so we'll definitely do that. But in the meantime, we'll set the broken one aside and focus on getting these to work. A beautiful sight here. We're fully populated. This is my original working one, and in fact, I'm going to mark the replacement just so I don't go crazy. I'll just give it a dot here, and that'll be our replacement board that we put in, so I'll get these slid back in now. They slot in like this. This is processor position 2, and it's my original known good working one. The good news is the management software, there we go, is smart enough to tell us which one it thinks is having a problem. We can locate it fairly easily. IBM is really good about that stuff. Enterprise machines in general are, but IBM is particularly good. Now you kind of slot it in. It's quite a large connector down there, I'll show you. And then you push these the rest of the way, and something that kind of bothers me about these power machines, or at least this one in particular. The processors don't seat quite as well as you'd hope they would, but they all do that. This is a known good one and it's fine. So anyway, there's the massive connector down in the processor slot down there. All sorts of stuff going on. And our replacement. I'm looking at our date codes. My original processor assembly was built in 2007. This one was built 2008, I guess. Hopefully that's a good sign. So yeah, it just doesn't want to seat in there quite as well as you'd want. Now this does seat better than the other one. I guess I'll give it that. But I think we're in there. This is the broken one, and the only physical difference I could ever see on this one compared to the other was like these fins have been separated and a little banged up, sort of implying to me that maybe it's been dropped. It's hard to believe this has ever even been taken out of that thing besides anyone that, but me, like a previous owner. I highly doubt it, but it does have some sort of like fin damage, like it got messed with. The other ones don't have that, but who knows? It's hard to say what could be wrong. Before we power this thing up, I want to talk a little bit about the different management aspects of it and how you actually can interact with the machine. Because one of the reasons I like to mess around and play with this pSeries gear and equipment is the management ecosystem that IBM created. The first port of call is typically this front display here. It lights up green, and when the machine is booting up, it'll display progress codes about various status and steps the machine is at in its life cycle. You can actually interact with the thing and manipulate the machine and get a little more information that way via the menu system. The next level is going to be simply the serial port on the back. There is a serial management interface that you can interact with. It's got some cool, we'll call them console graphics, and you can configure the machine pretty much fully that way. The next level is you get it on a network and you point an old web browser at it, and you can access something called the ASMI, or the Advanced System Management Interface. This is basically a web UI that lets you access and manage the machine remotely. And it's my understanding that it pretty much still looks like this, even as of a few years ago in this pSeries of equipment. And then finally, most exciting, I'm sure you've noticed, there's another machine next to me. There's some software called the Hardware Management Console. Hardware Management Console, or HMC, harkens back to the mainframe days where you would have a cheaper, smaller, more commodity computer hooked up to a mainframe for management. It's the same concept here. You run software on this smaller budget commodity server. This is a plain old eServer X Series 336 from the early 2000s, I believe. And for whatever reason, IBM designated a few of these as being allowed to run the HMC software. In this case, we've got a 7310-CR3. This is a plain old Xeon server, but you can get the HMC ISOs from IBM's website. They're free and open to use. And it's basically a stripped down version of Linux that you can run on here, and it checks sort of for some serial ID or hardware level information to decide if it wants to run. I think this can be tricked, and the common practice these days is to run that in a VM, but of course, this is way more fun. And you get a full-blown management interface that is capable of managing multiple P5 machines. These are some of the recordings I had shown you from previous videos of me using the HMC. After some basic checks here, we're going to fire all this up and we'll be using an HMC to interact with this thing. When I plug this thing in here in the workshop with 110 volts, the HMC and remote management stuff will be able to start up. We'll see the green screen on the front light up, but we won't be able to fully power it up and leverage it until I move it into the other room with the 220 volt service. All right, let's power this thing up. I can't remember if it's just going to spring to life or I have to press the actual power button, so it is springing to life, so to speak. So we've got signs of life there. That's green. I can hear the power supply fans in the back, meaning that remote management is now available. And like I was saying before, it's running through some progress indicator codes. It kind of tells you what it's up to. Here I am not having my audio recorded. So what I'm saying is I'm just getting junk on the terminal console here over the serial port. And these P5 machines are very particular. So that USB to serial dongle I showed you, they really don't like it. So I think what I'm gonna have to do is boot up a real machine with a real serial port and we'll get connected that way. Actually, I think it's booted enough to the point where it's time to move it in the other room. I think I'm happy. This little warning is almost certainly that only one power supply is plugged in. And you can see where it says HMC equals 0. This thing knows that it's supposed to be hooked up to an HMC. They kind of preserve that configuration. And 0 means it can't find it. So it's waiting to see the HMC on the network. So I think we're gonna go ahead and move this over. Generally speaking, when these power machines make it to this screen with the V equals F, T, M, all that stuff that I have forgotten what all that means. I know what the HMC equals 0 means. It's generally healthy. It's definitely healthy enough to hook up to an HMC or go check out the ASMI remote web management. So that's what we're gonna do. We'll power this off. So before I lug this guy into the other room, it weighs over 100 pounds, by the way. Wish me luck. I'll walk you through the network we're gonna need. So this is my HMC at the top here, and it's got a network port. We're gonna need to connect this up on the same network, obviously, as the HMC ports down here. I think I'm using HMC1. You can assign them each a different IP for redundancy reasons. In previous videos, I had some dreams of grandeur about a very complex network setup between these two machines and the other P5 I have. I have not realized that yet. So we're gonna simplify things here until I know that processor assembly board works with something pretty special. I just got this awesome unit in. This is an IBM 8237 stackable hub. It's a little older than these P5 units. You can tell by the IBM logo here, obviously, but looks great nonetheless. This thing will be featured in more depth in future networking videos, but I thought this would be probably the most appropriate thing I have to make a simple network between all this IBM gear. I just got this in this week from a patron named Rainer, and he made it very easy to get this all the way over from Europe. I think this thing started its life in Turkey, and by way of Austria, oder Österreich for Rainer, it made it to my house here in Colorado. So I'm really thankful to them. Thank you so much, and I'm excited to use this in conjunction with this maybe not era appropriate stuff, but who knows? When you're running these management networks, you don't need a lot of bandwidth, obviously, so who knows how many of these old boys were floating around in data centers, or still are, hooking up these pSeries power gear. Lug that thing over by the rack without hurting myself. It's sitting on some 2x4s on the ground so that in theory, I can pick it up again later. It's got 220 volts going to it, so we should be able to completely bring it up and online, assuming the replacement processor assembly is functional. The HMC machine is sitting on top of the rack as well. I've got a monitor on it. This thing takes forever to boot up, like 15 plus minutes from the time you power it on to the time you can use the software, and I always think something is wrong, so it's nice to have a monitor on there to watch the progress. And the HMC software really is just running on some stripped down Linux distro. That IBM hub is how we're going to network all this stuff together, including a Windows XP VM I'm going to access the HMC software with. It's working great. In fact, I got to show you the light show it puts on when you first power it up. Plug it in here. Excellent. All right, let's see if we can power this thing up. This is what happens when you hit the endpoint for the HMC. Believe it or not, I have found that this older version of Firefox works quite a bit better than IE, Firefox 3.0.3. So we'll log on and launch here. The root user is HSC root, and I've since changed the password, but I think it used to be ABC123 is the default. All right, welcome to the HMC. I am running version 790 from 2014, if you're curious. You kind of have this welcome area with a bunch of areas you can go navigate. I always like this in the systems section. That looks suspiciously like an IBM mainframe. I was doing a little research. I think the ones with those orange accents are the IBM Zs that run Linux, maybe? At least according to Wikipedia. I love little details like that in this enterprise software stuff. So you open up Systems Management, and then Servers. And here you can see I have a couple. So let's bring this up, and the screen on the right will get a little more detailed. This one is another P5 machine I have, a much smaller one. It's not connected, so this thing has seen it before, but knows it's not around. This one, JDE- the model and serial number, that's our big guy that I just hauled in there. And it is connected to the HMC, so when they're on the same network, it's pretty easy to just get them hooked up and finding the HMC. It's actually ridiculously straightforward. And then if we go look at this thing, it's been partitioned into 7 different pieces. So these are the LPARs I was talking about. You can think of them like VMs, but it's a little lower level. It's almost like the physical machine itself has been partitioned. The whole thing is a hypervisor, I guess. I'm definitely not an expert, but I want to build one of these myself. Now you can see we're in the not available status. The nice thing about the HMC is I'm gonna click this, and it's just gonna open up a help document and tell me exactly what's going on. So not available means that the managed system, meaning my 550Q, is in error, recovery, or incomplete. We were definitely in an error state because that processor was broken last time I powered it up, but we might be incomplete, like the HMC hasn't found all the information it needs. You can see they have JDE in the name. That almost certainly stands for JD Edwards. JD Edwards is some software, some CRM software that's really popular to run on these big IBM machines. I think Oracle owns them now. So you can see this thing was set up as a JDE machine, a CRM machine. One of the partitions was a database, some other APIs, maybe the applications running here. They had a test partition, so either someone was just poking around at LPARs, or that might have been like a test environment. So you could have like your whole production set up on one physical machine, I think is the pitch from IBM anyway. I'm not as familiar with this, but you can see the last two partitions are called virtual IO servers. These are partitions that are dedicated to running some software called virtual IO, and I think it lets the other partitions share hardware, whereas traditionally they're totally segregated, like each one has its own, network interface and SCSI interface physically in the box. And I think this VIOS stuff is some fancy software magic to let them share hardware resources or something like that. Okay, I think I've put this off long enough. I'm pretty nervous here. I really want to see this thing work, and it was such a bummer to power it on last time and it didn't. So let's see, I think we can go to tasks. We got operations, and from here, we're going to power it on. So remember, the server's plugged in and it's got its little HMC computer inside running, and it's able to talk to this hardware management console, but it's not up. It's not fully powered up. The processors aren't on. So here we go, power on. And then I think we'll just do a normal startup. I think I can hear it. Here you can see we're starting to see reference codes. So this would be what's actually on that green screen in the front. I'm gonna let this cook, and I'll be back in a moment. Hopefully we're up. Another cool part about the HMC, you can click the reference code and it'll tell you what it is. So this is the very first one that particular P5 always shows, and it's transitioning from standby to power on. So we'll see. We're in the initializing status now, and of course we can click that. Initialization stuff is coming online as the machine is bringing itself up and trying to become operational. Not looking good. It said its status was incomplete, and now it's powering off. So we'll have to go look at some logs that it produced, hopefully. The last code was, transitioning to power off for some reason. So you can look at the logs of these things by going into serviceability. They're called serviceable events. So you go manage them, and this lets you filter them down, but I'm just going to look at all of them. And this was our latest power up here. And it's a bunch of complaints about the power supply. So detected AC loss was the first one. And then power supply failure was the next error. Another detected AC loss. Finally, the system was terminated because of a power fault. So I guess I'll try the other power supply, see if that makes a difference, though I think they're known good. And then after that, we'll have to pull those boards again and see what's up. Man, this thing has been whooping me for like 6 months. I'm going to power it on while I'm in here with the lid off so I can examine all these LEDs on the processor boards as it fires up. And as expected, the power supplies report themselves as completely healthy, which they always have. So I'm finding this power fault very suspicious. It's very slow. So it's been booting for a few minutes now. The fans have come online, and we can see some of these LEDs on the boards. It's quite the operation as this thing comes to life. So it turned all the fans on, it's turning the PCI boards on and SCSI controllers. And I think it's getting further than last time. So it's saying hypervisor code modules are being transferred to system storage. It hasn't powered on the processor assemblies yet. They're totally dead still. But I'm certain that it is getting further than my last attempt. Very strange. It's up. It's working. It's in standby mode. So it'll stay in this mode until a LPAR is activated. We can't really do anything with these because I don't have the hard drives. Those were pulled before this machine was sold. But look at this. It knows how much RAM was dedicated to each one. So this was a pretty hefty one, 16 gigs for JDE PL. How many processing units? So the portions of the processors. And this is very exciting. You can assign fractions of processors to LPARs, but I wasn't sure if this machine could do it, or you might have to have like a certain service level with IBM. But this appears to be capable because this test LPAR has 0.1 processing units. These virtual IO servers have 0.3 processing units. Absolutely fascinating. So I think let's go look at one. Let's look at JDE-DB. So I didn't have any access to this information when I had that bad processor. Both processors have to be working. A side note, actually, you might be wondering why I don't just pull one out and be done with it. Well, the machine won't run with just one. You have to get a obviously very hard to find filler card that actually goes in the empty slot. That will allow the machine to boot up with one processor assembly, but as you can imagine, those are not easy to come by. Yeah, so you can change all the settings and how much CPU and RAM is assigned. Absolutely fascinating. So what we get to do now is get rid of these things, because I'm going to make my own. I have no idea how to do that. Yeah, so I'm going to start deleting these partitions, and then, oh good, an error has occurred. Oh, IBM gives you the full stack, huh? We crashed in task interface.java, line 396. This is some Java. We got filter chains. We got a delete LPAR panel bean. Anyway, I'll delete these. I'll be back. Got them all deleted. That was pretty easy. Thank you for your service, JDE 9133558, blah, blah, blah. So when you delete them all, it kind of looks like you can no longer do anything, which is alarming. But all you got to do is go back to servers. And you can see we have all 8 cores available, so it knows it's an 8-way system, and it sees all 64 gigs, which is awesome. It must reserve some portion of a gigabyte for system use. Now, if we select this bad boy and go to tasks, in configuration, we can go ahead and start creating new partitions, and that'll be involved. So before we do this, I only have 1 hard drive in there. I want to make 2 partitions for science, and they're each going to need a hard drive. So let's discuss the hard drive situation. Something you got to know if you're going to get into these P-series of machines is they take SCSI drives in those front bays. That can already be a little bit of a challenge, because if you're just the average person with PCs and, you know, old retro gear, you're not going to have a lot of SCSI drives. It's definitely in the enterprise space back in the day. And they typically had this connector here during this time period, which you might be familiar with. But unfortunately, in these P-series of machines, you can't just slap these in. You need these special interposer boards, which convert that connector over to the P5 ones. Now, I like to, you know, complain and moan about it, but it's probably for like hot swapping. This is a more reliable connector than that one, perhaps. I'm not sure, but you're going to run into this if you want to collect these things. You need these interposer boards. It's just a physical conversion. There's no smarts or anything on this thing. And you'll get these trays. You need the sleds, of course, these drive sleds. Those will come with the machine almost always. You know, you'll have 1 or 2 in the lot if you're buying it on eBay, but these things do not. So you're going to have to probably find these separately, something to watch out for. And you can see I've actually got a couple of these P-series drives, eServer branded. That was slightly older than the machines I've got, but I can't get those P5s to recognize these. These need some sort of low-level formatting that I don't feel like dealing with at the moment. So we're going to slap this Sun-branded Fujitsu drive in just because we can. I'm going to get this racked up in one of these sleds and get that in the machine. Okay, got that Sun drive in here. I apparently chose the worst, most mangled drive sled I have. It's supposed to look a little something more like this. So I'll try to push that back into position. That'll be fine. Let's create a couple partitions. I'm going to put AIX, IBM's Unix variant, on here that would have been typically running on these P-servers machines. I've got my official disks right here. And we'll, of course, be calling these LPAR 1 and 2. It shrinks the window every time you advance. That's nice. Profile name. Profile 1. This is so cool that you can do partial processor units. I just find that so fascinating. Well, let's give this one 1, and we'll give it 8 gigs of RAM. This is sort of a weird interface where you're specifying gigs and then megabytes if you want in the second field. Here's where it gets interesting. So you assign dedicated hardware resources to each LPAR. And now that I'm looking at this, I'm sort of wondering if I can even divide those hard drives between 2 LPARs, because they're going to be on the same storage controller, I think. We'll see. I'm not sure how that's going to work. I probably need like a pool of storage. That'd be a better setup. We might just be making 1 LPAR today. I'm going to go look up the location code for the controllers on the drives on the front. There might actually be 2 controllers, and we might be able to split the drives up. The partitions are able to share the serial port. I might need that to install the operating system. I've only used the serial port to install operating systems on these before. We're going to tell the LPAR to boot to something called the System Management Services. This is a serial console-based environment where you can look at hard drives and install an OS. I assigned it the SCSI controller, which is a card in there that I believe is connected to the front panel with all those drives. The question will be, can it see a hard drive, and will I be able to share those hard drives amongst multiple partitions? All right, one partition is ready. I'm going to make another one, except this time I'm giving it 2.5 processing units, just because I can. 2 partitions now. We need to activate it. We need to bring it online. Activate. Yes. What? Oh, we can see the console from here. That'll be nice for OS installation. I figured that it was going to be something like that. Okay, so what I need to do is operations, activate, profile. I assigned a profile of resources that I called profile 1 to this LPAR. It was all those CPU and memory settings you saw me set up. And then I have another one for the other LPAR. Oh man. It's running. Yes. This machine is working. And so this is like another little machine. So see, it's got its own reference codes. It's as if it's its own P5 machine, right? So yeah, here we go. Let's see if we can see a console. Not allowed. What? Remote virtual terminal. I want to turn this on. Why would you not want that? Oh yeah, here we go. Java, always. Hostname mismatch. Totally fine. Sure. Null pointer exception. Come on. It's not the end of the world. I think I can just plug a serial terminal into the machine, but I'd really like to be able to do it from here. And obviously you're supposed to be able to. Well, before I figure out a physical serial connection, which hopefully won't be too bad, let's turn on the other one. Go operations, activate profile. You can see this was another profile I had to name. Let's see if this works from here. That wasn't available before. We're dying on this Java thing. So here's the stack trying to open up that virtual terminal. It's dying pretty early on. I'm probably just using the wrong Java version. Let's launch the ASM. This is that other interface I was telling you about. You can get to that from within the HMC. It's kind of interesting. If you didn't have an HMC, this is the remote GUI you would be using for the P5 management. I don't recall there being a console access here. I actually don't know why I'm in here because this thing doesn't know about the LPARs. I don't think that's in the realm of the HMC. I couldn't get the terminal to launch, so I actually had to go in the room with the physical HMC hooked up to a monitor, and I can get it to launch there, and it doesn't see any devices. So I messed up. So I shut down the first LPAR. This UI is confusing, so I had kind of like clicked these, you know, and then clicked OK. That doesn't do anything. You actually have to add specifically with these buttons. I'm going to add, I believe the SCSI controller is what I want. So I'm going to add that. Now it's marked required, and I'll give it a Ethernet port as well, and we'll see where this gets us. All right, so now the thing can see the Ethernet port, so that part worked, but clearly that SCSI controller I added is not what I think it is. So I know it's probably really painful to watch me clunk through this, but we'll figure it out. I'm going to sort out the storage and physical I/O headache off camera, and then I'll come back and explain what I figure out. But in the meantime, while I ponder my life choices and why I'm trying to set up LPARs in my basement, let's take a look at this thing. So I'm convinced that the replacement is operating just fine. I was able to fully boot up 2 LPARs. They don't have OSs, but that means the CPU is working just fine and everything's good there. Well, let's get this heatsink off and take a look at this POWER5 Plus CPU. I'm really curious. I think it's quite large. It's probably some other subcomponent that's causing an issue here. I doubt the CPU is actually damaged. I'm probably never going to go through the trouble to figure that out unless I had a parts rig or something like that. And everything I do here is going to be reversible. I'm not going to damage anything permanently. Well, let's get this thing off. Should be an interesting experience. It's kind of got this like tension bar thing here that this clamp is using. So hopefully we just release these screws. And I think we'll get this torsion bar thing off. Hopefully I have the right bit. This one kind of looks like it's been messed with before, which is sort of suspicious. We'll start with this middle one, I guess. Oh, it is like stripped. There we go. I think that's what we want. With that loose, we can lift, I guess, take off this tensioner bar thing. I'm not really sure. Maybe we'll hit the 4 screws around the perimeter. Maybe it just comes right out as an assembly. Took the 4 screws out of the corner of the heatsink, and after we loosened this one on the top, it means we can kind of pull this little latch off and it releases from this bar. And oh yeah, it's going to come pretty easily. Whew, this is hefty. Not as cool as the pictures, but still pretty cool, I think. I was expecting it to be a little bigger. Now, can I pull it out? Let me clean it up real quick. Cleaned up a little bit. I want to get it out of there, to get a better look at it. The question is, can I do that without breaking it? I think I'm going to take this big bracket thing off to get more room to work and wedge under there. I suppose I don't even know if it's socketed. It might just be soldered on there. Do a little research. I'm fairly certain it's not socketed, but there it is. Pretty cool to see. Definitely unique looking. It's quite tall, as you can see. Pretty impressive chunk of ceramic or whatever this is. There you have it, a POWER5 Plus quad-core CPU. Let's get back to my LPAR storage nightmare. I've got it sort of figured out. We'll use the lid here with its location codes to try to describe what's going on here. The thing called Other Mass Storage Controller in the hardware list and the HMC, that's the CD-ROM. So when I assign that to one of the LPARs, it shows up as a device. We'll do one LPAR at a time and get AIX installed. Where it gets a little more confusing is we have the SCSI bus controller and a storage controller. The SCSI bus controller is a SCSI card that's in one of the PCI slots, and it is actually plugged in to half of the front drive base. These things are called 4-packs, so you can install one here and one here. My machine happens to be maxed out. Now there is an internal SCSI controller, which I'm hoping is the thing called storage controller. We'll see. So the dream here is storage controller can give these 4 drives to one LPAR, and the SCSI controller that's plugged into this right 4-pack here can give the other 4 to another LPAR. Remember, we can't assign the same physical resources to 2 LPARs. They have to be dedicated per partition. Let's get the first one set up with the storage controller. And you don't actually see the disks in the SMS menu usually. You have to boot into AIX. So we'll do that. But I don't feel like fighting with whatever Java version is giving us this null pointer exception for the console and the HMC. And I'm not going to go sit in there and try to film it with the local console and listen to all those servers. So we're going to leverage this. This is a Dell PowerEdge 2161 DS-2 KVM. It is going to let me screen capture the VGA output from the HMC and be able to leverage it here in this room without listening to it. The way this thing works, around back we've got some PS2 ports for a local mouse and keyboard, only the finest down here, by the way. And then a VGA port for a local monitor. I'll put this into an HDMI capture card. What we do is we send an Ethernet cord over into the other room. I've got plenty of these running into the room with the rack from this area. And then we leverage these things called SIPs, or server interface pods. So on the other end of this Ethernet cord, I'll plug one of these in, and I can get VGA mouse and keyboard on the HMC unit, that old IBM eServer. And this is a good excuse to try some of these other SIPs that I've got. A long time ago, many months ago, a very generous viewer named William shipped me some of these. SIP, VGA still, but USB. So we'll try that. I just haven't had a reason to pull these out and give them a shot. I've got plenty now. I'll definitely be putting these to good use and get them all working on retro servers in the future, but let's try one of these out. Got one of those USB SIPs hooked up to the HMC in the server room, and here we are with all this hooked up locally. I've just got it going to this Dell monitor for now, and then I'll get a proper capture set up when I get things going. I think you hit control a few times, just twice, yeah. And you get this local interface menu. This thing is the SIP, so it used to be called whatever this is. They had some naming convention in the previous data center it was in, and you can configure it and go right into it. And look at that. That looks incredible. This is perfect. My mouse is obviously working. Let's see if we can type. We definitely can. So this is working perfectly. Okay, I'm gonna get this hooked up to a proper capture card, and we'll get down to business. I Noctua modded this thing, so it actually makes 0 noise, which is kind of nice. If you're in the market for one of these KVM setups, especially for like your home lab, I wouldn't get this one. So Famicoman did a great video on sort of a slightly newer version of this that has like an HTML5 interface. This one, you're stuck with like a clunky Java one or using it locally the same way I do. I'm gonna link to that video down in the description. If I was doing this again, I would have got that one. I didn't know it existed, and I went with this older model. So yeah, this is cool and it's fun to use and everything, but you know, practically speaking, it makes more sense to get one of the slightly newer ones. We're looking at the output from the KVM, and it's always kind of been sort of hard to use and a little too small, even on the local monitor attached to the HMC, but I guess we can kind of manipulate and move around the UI this way. I'm powering it back on, which is always nerve-wracking, so when it wasn't working, remember I was getting those AC power errors even with the new good processor unit. And all I did was switch power supplies and then it started working. This is the first time I've rebooted the machine since I did that. So hopefully it remains working. The more times you boot these, you sort of get a feel for if they're behaving. So of course, you know, I'm sure very few people remember what these different progress codes mean, but some of them are encouraging, like it's doing a random data test on the processor, for example. So of course, we've probably gotten past any power failures. In the meantime, we can rename our SIP, maybe people call them SIPs. So if you hit Control twice, at least in my configuration with this Dell KVM, this little kind of menu comes up, and then we can go to Setup, and it's horribly skewed right now, but here you can see how it pulls up. You can hit Print Screen, Control. That's what I've got configured. Names. So we can modify the name of this SIP. The SIP stores its name locally in that little module I was showing you. So this thing just reaches out and tries to find them and gathers information from them. And it can also push firmware updates to them and stuff. It's kind of interesting. So we're going to rename this one to HMC. And there we go. So now you can see there's this sort of overlay on the screen. The KVM is doing that, letting you know which of the machines you're talking to, because you can hook, you know, tons of machines up to these things. It'd be pretty easy to get confused. We are up. We are in standby. So let's go make sure our first LPAR is properly configured. Okay, so right now it's got a Ethernet port assigned to it, other mass storage controller. That's a CD-ROM. Remember, we're gonna want that in this case. It's a little clunkier using it live on this thing than on the web UI, I must admit. Okay, we are also going to assign storage controller. I'm hoping that's one of the 4 packs on the front. So we'll configure this. And now we can actually activate it, which is another word for turning the LPAR on, basically. And now that we're on the HMC directly, we can open up a terminal window. Now, what you're seeing here is the LPAR booting into SMS. And we'll actually be able to choose, I haven't shown this very well because it was hard to film in the other room. The keyboard is not working in that window. No way. The numpad keys work. So select boot option and we can go to select the boot device. And the best thing you can do here basically is number 7, list all devices, just to see what the computer thinks it knows about. We're not seeing any hard drives, which is usually pretty typical. You usually need to boot into the actual OS, AIX here. So I'm gonna go throw this in the CD-ROM and then we're gonna see where we get. CD is in. Let's choose the CD-ROM as our boot device. Normal boot mode, I think, is fine. And I think it's going to boot right to it. So we'll say, yes, we want to exit. And what we should see here is an AIX installer trying to start. And it takes quite a while. You can see we've got a little spinner in the bottom. That's good. The LED on the CD-ROM is cranking away. And here we go. Welcome to AIX. That took about 2 minutes. Not that bad. I think this part might take upwards of 5, 10, 15 minutes. So when you're here, don't panic. It's slow. It's kind of cool doing this on the real HMC. I've only installed AIX once before on my smaller P5, and it was directly over the serial console. It looks just like this, but this is kind of a more advanced experience, I'll say. I don't know how long it took, but it was definitely more than 5 minutes. I went upstairs to hang out with my wife. So we're going to type 1 for system console. It's always fascinating to see the really old IBM copyrights on this pSeries gear. It has such a history and lineage from the RS6000 machines, which we'll talk about later in the video. And yeah, it's part of why it's fascinating to use this stuff. I'm trying to reorient myself. So I think we want to go to number 2 to look at the install settings. Oh, this is incredible. So what we really want to see are disks that start with H disk 0, 1, 2, 3. So it thinks it found a disk already, which is just incredible. The best case scenario is it only sees 1. Remember, I'm hoping that this storage controller only has control of half of my 8 bays. The second best case is that it sees 2, which means we would only be able to install 1 LPAR with an OS, at least today anyway, and the worst case would have been it didn't see anything, so this is very exciting. Okay, it only sees 1 disk, H disk 0. So my hunch, I think, was correct. This storage controller only has control of half the disk. I mean, we'll see when we do the other LPAR. Let's get this thing going. There we go, installing base operating system. As I recall, from the one time I did this, it takes forever. So I'll be back when we can actually interact with AIX. We're about 25 or 30 minutes in, and it thinks it's like 40%, 39% done. And it just rolls through tons of these copyright notices and US government worker notices and licensed materials property of IBM. And it's very enterprisey. While that AIX install is cranking away, I wanted to touch on another reason these P-series of machines are so fascinating to mess around with, and it's because they can trace their lineage back to these. This monster is a late 90s IBM RS6000 or RIS System 6000. This one happens to be an F40, and of course, it's got a PowerPC inside. It's hard to portray exactly how large these things are. They're absolute units. It's got all the drives. The tape drive, we'll fix this door in a future video. CD-ROM, floppy. It doesn't have any hard disks. I bought a bunch of the caddies on eBay and the seller sent me not what was advertised. I cannot use these, so we'll sort that out in a future video. But yeah, I couldn't keep this in any longer. One of the reasons I want to sort out this 550 is it was kind of nagging me in the back of my head that I couldn't get that one working, and I want to sort that out before I move on to this monster. This will be a whole series of videos. I want to do due diligence, get the history right, make sure I don't mess it up. I've never even turned it on. It is functional, so it is working, but I want to be really careful as I boot it up and make sure I bring everyone along for the adventure. I got what I thought was a pretty good deal on this RS6000 from Winman 486. I actually drove all the way over to Kansas. Him and his buddy met me part way, and I actually got a huge pile of stuff from him, and if you want to see a sneak peek of that, you can go check it out on my Patreon page. But yeah, more good IBM stuff coming. I'm so excited to dive into this thing once I sort out my drive situation and do my homework. All right, back to the AIX LPAR. We're about 2 hours in, and it likes to do this where it complains about stuff that sounds really important, like it can't install devices.pci.ide and Ethernet, but in my experience, it's fine. So we'll keep waiting. It rebooted, and let's go into select boot options again. Keyboard's working better now for some reason. Select boot device, hard drive. Let's list them all. Always good to list them all. Sees that SCSI device, and in fact it knows that AIX is installed on it. Kind of going back to that ecosystem I was talking about that IBM has. So we want that to be our boot device. Let's select that. Oh, check that out. Starting kernel. That's the reference code. Fascinating. It's cranking. AIX is starting. This is very exciting. I don't really know why this is exciting, but I hope you'll agree that it is. This is the basic first setup of AIX. I guess we'll say VT100 for our terminal. That's a pretty safe option. We will accept all licenses. And then this hung me up the first time I ever used it. You're looking at this and you think everything's fine, but you actually have to press tab to accept the license agreement and then enter. I remember this being very hard to figure out the first time I did it. Escape 0, maybe? Maybe we're done. So yeah, you kind of accept it and you're in this command status. The command says everything's okay. And then you escape 0 to get to the next one. Yeah, so here we go. We're looking good. I'm gonna set a root password. We have a root password, so let's exit to login. And things should get a little normal here. Yeah, so AIX version 6, do root and the new password I just chose. And we're in, look at that. Welcome to AIX version 6.1, running on an official LPAR on the IBM 550Q, which I have been waiting for months to be able to see this. And of course, the first thing we're gonna do is shut it down. IBM's AIX instructions online are like totally whack about how to shut down the partition. They tell you step 1 is to reboot it for some reason. And that's literally what it did. It just rebooted it. Lost 3 minutes of my life. We're just gonna tell it to shut down, no reboot flag, and see if that can't get it to turn off. That worked. The HMC knows it's off. So what I'm gonna do is remove the CD-ROM from this one, and then we're gonna add it to the other one. I can all but assure you there are better ways to do this. I think the HMC has like some sort of virtual media capabilities, but we're doing it this way. This one's gonna have the SCSI bus controller. My dream being that that's the other 4 drives. Not really holding my breath on that. And then of course we've also given it the CD-ROM, taking it away from the other LPAR. Let's boot up the second LPAR. I've gotten into the AIX installer and I dug in. It sees HDisk 0, Of course, I'm trying to confirm if that's the disk I just used. And if we look at the location code, it is different from the hard drive location code that we just installed AIX on the first LPAR on. So I'm feeling pretty good that the SCSI controller is controlling one half of the disk packs and the internal controller is controlling the other. So this is great. I'm out of time. I don't have 2 more hours tonight to install AIX. So tomorrow I'll get AIX installed in this, and then I'll bring you back and we'll run 2 LPARs at the same time, something I've been trying to do for months. What would you do if you had $1 million? Run 2 LPARs at the same time. Got both terminal windows here. The one in the back is the first LPAR. The one in the front is the second one, both running AIX independently. It's the next day. The AIX install on the second LPAR went off without a hitch, except that it took 7 hours. So that hard disk might be on its way out. I've been wanting to set these up for months. It's so exciting to see both of these running independently. They're essentially 2 separate computers running on the same box. Really satisfied with this. As a side note, if you're gonna maybe mess around and pick up one of these P5 machines, I was taking a look at the enterprise enablement section and looking at the history log. When this 550Q was provisioned, just by coincidence and luck, it happened to be allowed to have multiple logical partitions, micro partitioning, which is why I was so excited about that. I had no idea that this thing would be allowed to do that. It's got the VirtIO server capability, and then PowerVM Standard Edition. I don't know how much of this just comes out of the box by default, but it might be something to look out for. I don't think all of these are created equal. I think some of it at least can depend on what the customer bought when they first got the machine and how it was provisioned when they set it up. But wait, there's more. This is my IBM system P5 520. This is the first P-series of equipment I ever picked up. I got it in a Craigslist lot with a bunch of other stuff. I had no idea what it was at the time, but I loved the looks, and I saw that IBM logo, and I knew I had to get it in the lot. I used to think this thing was absolutely massive, but it's downright cute compared to that 550Q, and barely even worth comparing to this RS6000. Just for fun, let's throw this on top of the 550 and get them hanging out in the HMC together. Got that 520 booting up over on top of the big guy, and I really like seeing those green screens lit up together. Of course, it's also plugged into the IBM hub now. And here we are. So their HMCs are up, but I'm not going to bother powering the machines on. Here was the big guy we've been playing with all video. And here's the little one. Remember, that was just the IP before. So when they're offline, it just remembers the IP. And when they come back up, it actually pulls information about the server, like its name and everything. So yeah, hopefully we can continue to expand this list. So where do we go from here? Well, I'm certainly going to start exploring at least one of the predecessors to this P5 series of equipment, the RS6000 here. And in fact, we'll go forward in time as well. I actually got a POWER6 unit in that lot from Winman 486. Specifically, we've got an 8203 E4A here. It's missing some cosmetic pieces, obviously, along with the lid. But my understanding is that it does run. And it actually came with a hard drive, which could be interesting. Unfortunately, in this Power series of gear, IBM switched to this kind of operator panel thing. They ditched the full-blown green front panel, which is kind of a shame. Now that I've got 2 fully functional P5s and I can create LPARs, I'd really like to actually explore getting some JD Edwards software on there, believe it or not. Also, apparently you can get Quake running on these things, and I've heard rumors of Doom. And in fact, I have a video card for these P-series of machines, so we might be able to make that a reality in the future. And there is an absolute ton of stuff to explore in this ecosystem. I don't know if I've portrayed it very well, but the reason I like using these machines and hooking them up to the HMC is that it's actually just really fun. One of the things that fascinates me about enterprise equipment is the remote management, and the HMC is like the ultimate manifestation of that, like its own separate computer. You've seen the interface and just how sophisticated and involved the whole process is and the separate networks. It's absolutely fascinating to mess around with. So this won't be the last time you see these P5s on the channel, and hopefully we'll actually start doing some real work on them. Wanted to throw it out there that I'm going to be at VCF Midwest on Saturday, September 7th, 2024. So if you see me, definitely come say hi, and hopefully we can talk about some of this P5 gear. I know this was a long one, but I can't seem to make a short video about this IBM stuff. I'm having a lot of fun doing it, and it sort of spirals out of control, you know, one problem to solve after the other, and you know how it goes. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.